understanding is that we get one shot at the hook. There is no vertical. Well, in this case, up to that. So now they know. There were 193 responses. And what you'll see is next to the number of the number that corresponds with a responder, you've got a time and a date. And that's the time that the survey was started, May 11th, 2020, 12:50. And that survey ended on May 11th at 12:51, about a minute and 15 seconds to answer that. And then over on the side, you see that their basic star, willing to support a budget up to a 15% tax levy limit. As I was going through this data, I noticed things like, some stretches of, I started color coding them just to illustrate, but a survey that ended at 18:06:29, so 6:06:29 p.m., and then the next survey started at 6:06:42 seconds. So 13 seconds later, another survey was started. And when that one ended, it was 8 seconds later, another survey was started. Now, it could be 3 different people in the household answering the survey and providing what their responses would be. Or it could be one person saying that they're comfortable anywhere between a 5% and 20%. There's no telling, but what it appears to be, and it doesn't have to be, but it appears to be 3 different responses with one person putting that data in. You had 3 in a row that came in at a 50%, supporting a 50% tax levy increase. I don't know how this happened, what kind of glitch was in the form, but they all have the same start and end time. So not quite sure how that happened, but it was a flag that I took notice of. Then there was a period of responses where it appeared as though a responder, or just happened to be a great coincidence. Here's a section that's highlighted in yellow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 responses, all saying 0%, with some very similar comments. It appears to be one respondent trying to have their voice count more, which is fine. They're emphasizing that they're very opposed to a tax increase. But it was also the section that's in green. You have people that were strongly in favor of a tax increase that appeared to have results that were duplicative. Green and yellow, those are 15%, 10% responses. So I put X's next to each grouping, just in a column to the right-hand side, just to identify. Then we get into this section where there are many zeros in a row. Somebody trying to make sure that we know that they are opposed to any kind of tax increase. There's a column that I created on the edge too that shows how many seconds were between the survey prior to it. So when you look at the first 0%, you can see that 4 seconds later was the next survey started. 1 second later, the next survey started. So these appear to come from the same device, even though they're anonymous. It was just some data that we had to sort through. So I share that with you to identify that what I did is I took out, I created a set of data just for comparison. What would it look like if we took out a bunch of the duplicates? So all those items that I put an X next to, I deleted those from the table and created a new chart. And you get a new set of information. It doesn't mean there's still people could have answered a survey on Tuesday and went back in on Wednesday. A lot of time had passed on either side of it. But it ends up going from 193 respondents to 111. So about 80 seemingly duplicated pieces of information. So what I did with that is I created a pivot table to identify, what does that look like as far as counts. And even in that one, the majority of the community is looking at tax increase being pretty painful. They're not supportive of an increase.
Greg, if you took all the ones opposite the 0 and stacked those up, that say that they would support some type of an increase.
Correct.
They would outweigh the ones that said 0.
Correct. Yeah. So with this data, I believe it was 35% of this data was in favor of no increase, which means you've got 65% in favor of a 5% increase or more. Or I'm not going to say in favor of. Nobody's in favor of a tax increase, but they would be willing to support 5% or more. But you go past that 5%, and those bars get pretty small. That's where you'd be looking at your supermajority. It'd be tough based on this data to be able to identify a supermajority support of tax levy. So I know that 50% on a worst case scenario would be necessary to sustain. 5% is better than 0%, but we're gonna feel it as we prepare a budget. And I understand the concerns from the community. Like I said, this is for the times that we're in, unprecedented times. But it's unprecedented times for schools too. And the kids that are going through school today, I believe, deserve the same or some kind of opportunity that everybody else who's been able to go through school in years past have been able to experience. So trying to do that, and I know that we're going to have to find creative ways to plug a gap. And it may just take, maybe we look at a couple of years to do that over time. But some of the pain I know we're going to have to feel this year as we try to navigate it. But we've also had some pretty, I think, creative ideas to plug some of the gap, and Bob's going to talk about that in a little bit. But I just wanted to make sure I presented to you, shared with you the data that we have. It's not comprehensive. We have a whole lot more than 191 voters or registered voters in the school district. But we tried to get it as close to actual, predictive data as we could, and we really won't know until June 9th what the community can support. So with that, Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about ways that we can plug anywhere between a $600,000 deficit and I think a $1.9 million deficit. I think you're on mute, Bob.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate you cutting the legs out from one of our options on us in order to address the challenges. But I think we have to be mindful of the information that you just presented as we move forward. And that was one of the edits that was made to the report today, was based on that. I do want to thank everybody for hopefully you had an opportunity over the weekend to look at the first draft of the report for this meeting. It was updated this afternoon based on a 2-hour meeting with the admin team going through the budget or through this report. And we updated some numbers. So I apologize for the late information to you, but I wanted it to be as up to date and thorough as could be. I'm going to share my screen. If I can get screen 2, there we go. You should be able to see my screen now with both the written report as well as the summary Excel spreadsheet. And my goal tonight is basically twofold. Threefold. First, to walk you through the discussions that the administrative team has had, review where we are, potentially where we could be going with how to address the budget issues. And then the second goal is to come up with a short-term or an immediate solution, which is to identify a budget that can be presented to the community. And really that's a budget that will set a spending ceiling for 2021 for moving forward, and that's kind of our best case scenario. But it has to be reflective of what reality is as well. And then the third goal is to go through, review the areas of possible reduction that the administrative team has identified, reviewed, prioritized, listed, re-reviewed, et cetera. And have the board review that and to make sure that your thoughts are in alignment with the district or with the administrative team's thoughts. adjust it to what your thoughts are, so that when we realize what is going to happen with state aids, we can quickly implement. So it becomes a sliding scale or a descending list of things that we can act upon. So if we need to find $500,000, an additional $500,000 of cuts, what are the first things that add up to $500,000 that is the highest priority to reduce? And so that way, once we know what those numbers are starting to look like, we can quickly adapt based on tonight's conversation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So page 1 of the report is basically a summary of the current state of the budget, which is, we'll call it draft 2, which was revenues and expenditures based on the April 1st aid run. This page was not changed from what was initially sent Thursday. It shows the $17.33 million in total revenues and resources, including use of $150,000 of fund balance, and $17.938 million in expenditures. That was updated to reflect the current discussions with MIFA about a 2% salary increase and taking their draft salary schedule and applying it to the staff. And that's where we end up with a budget gap at this point of $605,000. So the short-term question is how do we fill the $605,000? The long-term question, of course, still remains is what do we do if it goes beyond that? I did make a footnote on there regarding where numbers were at as of mid-April. The state was quoted in the media as saying that they're about 14% behind revenues. We have not heard where that first look-back period ended up. We expect to hear something from either the governor or the state budget director by Friday. That's the date that the state budget director had previously said, you should wait until the 15th to before you finalize your budgets. So we have that $605,000 shortfall, and then potential aid reductions of up to 20%, as Greg just alluded to. What does that mean? If our aid reduction is 5%, that adds another $590,000 that we need to find. If it's 10%, it's 1.18 million, and all the way up to 20% at 2.36 million. So that's on top of the 600,000. So we're looking at potentially a budget gap of almost $3 million total if we have a 20% aid reduction. $3 million on an $18 million budget is about 17%. That's 1 out of every $6 would have to be cut. That's not trimming fat. That's not cutting muscle. That is amputating limbs from the bodies of the school district. So how do we first address the issue of the 605,000? The first question is can we do something on the revenue side? Now this 605,000 does not include revenues from the capital exclusion and the tax cap formula that we've talked about. That total is $154,670 that could be added to the revenue side to help close that gap. That is one option. A second option is to pierce the tax cap, and we've discussed a $200,000 pierce. We've also discussed a $350,000 pierce, but only in the context of not doing something with the capital exclusion, kind of setting that aside for future years to potentially use. Given the outcome of the survey and the sentiments expressed by the community, as you see in that table, we've already redlined those, piercing the cap options. And unless you want to direct me to put that back in, I'd be happy to put that back in and prepare the budget for 2021 with that included, so that it can be approved next Tuesday.
At
But
10%, it will fail.
exactly.
So there's no sense. I mean, with the capital exclusion, we can go as high as 5% and change, correct? 5.45.
545, yes.
I mean, I personally really think that's where we got to shoot for. I got some comments I'll make later, but go on. I just think that we're fooling ourselves if you think even that people will buy into a 10 or a 15%. I don't think it will happen.
No, and I think that the survey data that Greg just shared bears that out as well. And I think as more results come in, even if it's filtered for potential increase, we're just going to see those numbers really kind of flesh out. So really, the only way that we can balance next year's budget will require some level of reductions in expenditures. So we have, on the table here, I have 3 options listed. One is to use the liability reserve to help cover some legal costs that we anticipate, and that way it's not generally, it's still part of the general fund budget, but it's being funded by a separate line, a separate allocation. The second is to use any projected surplus from 1920, and the third is to incorporate that capital exclusion of the revenue cap into our tax cap formula. And I guess at this point, I'm wondering where the board stands on those 3 options, whether to incorporate those or not. It's specifically the first and third, the liability and the capital exclusion.
For 1 year and 1 year only, I do not have a problem using fund balance, whatever we have to do, because until a lot of this is going to have to go back to the federal government too, if they are going to make states whole or not. But unfortunately, it's not going to happen in time for us for this year. But until that piece of the puzzle is in place, going forward, we're not going to know where we are. And I don't want to make huge cuts and then find out, well, we didn't have to, Yep. That's my opinion.
Thoughts about only bringing in the capital exclusion that brings the tax levy to 4.95.
So to reduce the exclusion, I need to open up.
I guess I'm just asking the question. So, what the data that we were collecting was what levy would you support, and the limit was 5%. The next limit was up to 10%, but just...
Well, I think we can make the argument that our tax cap by formula is 5.45%. Is that a correct statement?
That is correct.
I mean, that is an argument. We're not exceeding the tax cap. And at that point, we just need a simple majority. Is that correct also?
Correct. If we wanted to keep use the capital exclusion, but keep the total increase to under 4.95%, using $130,000 tax capital exclusion into the calculation would get us to the 495. Actually, it'd be 4935.
So you're not obligated to use the whole exclusion?
No.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. We would say that we were funding the other, in this case, the other 25,000. We would fund using fund balance or other local sources. So, this is really the tax cap exclusion is an opportunity to use taxes rather than operating revenues to fund the local share of debt service.
I think I mean, the 4493, it's like buying they see the first number first, just like buying a car. And I think Jackie would agree, sitting here long term, that boy, the minute you pass 5%, you're playing with fire. Would you agree with that, Jackie?
You are, but in 35, 40 years, we at times have pierced the tax cap. Well, we put in a budget with more than 5%. I don't know, I don't think we should sell the community short. If we need the money, we need the money. I think too often the board has tried to keep the tax levy low when the community would have supported a higher tax levy, and in the long run, we're suffering.
I agree. I agree wholly with that statement, but that was not in times where there was 14% unemployment.
You're right.
Too, you know.
I think that it might be worth exploring keeping the levy under 4.95 or keeping it under 5 for that point that Murray just made. And we can apply the remaining portion of the capital exclusion next year to bring it in. And I think that I understand Murray's point of we're still staying below the tax levy limit, but we're also, I think it's something that we can communicate put out to the community that we heard them, that a majority of the respondents could support a 5% increase. 50% is way too much. And we heard you, and we put something together that
but is all not relative to what the governor says?
Well, I think what happens if Bob will talk about the expense side of the budget and the revenue side of the budget. There's two different things we need to budget around.
Okay.
But if the governor comes in and if we plan, for example, on a reduction, if Bob develops a budget that has a reduction in state aid of 9.7% or whatever his average was, and the governor comes in and says you're going to have an 8% reduction, that means we've got more revenues from the state that we can use to either to offset the fund balance allocation or apply in future years to limit what the increase would have to be in the future.
So am I hearing consensus then to look to using a capital exclusion amount of about 130,000 to keep the tax levy increase under 5%?
Is that a yes from Renee?
I say go higher. Just my feeling, I feel that we continually sell the community short, that they could handle a little bit more if they knew that there was a reason why.
But it's my understanding that we have one shot and one shot only at this budget. Is that correct? Before we're forced into a contingency?
I asked that question of state aid planning at Questar BOCES. The response I got back was the executive order was silent on the issue of a revote date. They are interpreting that as there will not be a revote procedure this year. And if the budget fails, that it will require the district to implement a contingency budget at that point.
Which is a 0% levy, am I correct?
Correct. That's $105,000 is the increase from last year's levy to the 2.2% is 105,000. So that's more revenue that we need to make up.
I had a phone call with Representative Niskus on their state council superintendents this afternoon as well, and he verified that The executive order is silent on it, and their interpretation is there is no revote procedure, and had caution on putting out something with the anticipation that we would have an opportunity to go back and ask the community for less.
The other piece about it in my conversation with Questar was once we certify the tax cap calculation in the tax cap report card to SED, there's no going back to edit it. In a typical year, you're not allowed to go back after the budget fails and recalculate your tax cap calculation. So the context of the question was, can you redo it to increase it? And that gets back to the, that 350,000 versus 100 and, using the exclusion or not. But the answer was pretty definitive. Once you submit the report card, the tax cap calculation is final. And the tax cap report card is due to SED by Friday, the 22nd. And in our case, since the board will be voting on the budget next Tuesday, we'll be submitting that next Wednesday.
Greg, in your survey, was the cutoff 5% or was it 5.5?
5%. But it also depends on how they were reading it. They're looking at being supportive of they said up to 5%. Does that mean that people would all of a sudden drop their interest if it was 5.5%? I mean, those people that would have supported 5.5% would have gone up to 10%, but maybe they don't want 10%. It's close, but we're talking about we're talking about $20,000 or $30,000, Bob, between 5.93 or 4.935 and 5.45.
We're talking $24,670.
That's for that amount to keep it under 5. Increase your fund balance by that much, just make up for it, but go back next year and apply it to get to that.
The overall isn't. That's what I was going to ask you. What are you looking at? How much is it? Is this? I mean, you're talking. In the grand scheme of things, it's not a ton of money.
It's not a lot of money, but it's a lot of perception.
No, but I mean, if you go from 4.9 to 5.45, you're talking $24,000. You're not. I don't want to make it sound like it's not a lot of money, but in funding,
it's basically a third of a position.
Right. That's what I was getting at. That's what I was trying to figure out.
Yeah. It's not do or die. I agree. 24 is a lot of money, but it's not a hill I care to die on trying to push it either.
Right. Okay. That being the case, I would stick with the 4.9.
4.935.
4.935.
Bob, I had asked Greg this week, are schools allowed to borrow short-term debt for recurring expenses?
We are allowed to borrow for cash flow purposes, which would short-term borrow. So yeah, that would be for recurring. You just have to be able to pay it off within, I believe it's a 12-month period. So that would be one way to do it. Usually those short-term borrowing is done just to get over valleys in between state aid payments.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, our valley would just be that much deeper, so it would certainly be feasible.
I was just looking at it as a way to mitigate cuts.
The challenge is,
like I said, nobody is going to know for quite some time where this really shakes out and lands. But once you incur the debt, obviously you're obligated to it.
yeah. Yeah, that's why,
Unless you just declare bankruptcy and absolve ourselves of all of our debts.
I'm not sure we're quite at the spot where Skenavis is yet.
Yeah, well.
Difficult to buy a school in the next 7 years, though.
I'm sorry?
So it would make it difficult to buy a school in the next 7 years, though, if we did that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
That's true. So, okay, so I'm hearing the board leaning towards the 4935, but I'm not sure it's consensus. We can continue to work on that, and you can provide additional feedback during the week to Greg or myself, and we'll certainly finalize the budget, and we can certainly tweak it next Tuesday, one way or the other. I assume, I'm not going to assume. Is everybody okay with using the liability to reserve to fund certain?
Absolutely.
To use the liability reserve for?
I'm on board with that.
Okay. I do want to come back to the use of the fund balance of a potential surplus for this year. Because I want to address something on the expenditure side that Greg has been working on, which has the potential to save us a dramatic amount of money and avoid a significant amount of layoffs. We have been in discussions with the teachers union about a retirement plan, which would allow senior staff members to retire and start to collect WRS or TRS, and then be rehired and still work within the limits of the cap that TRS has established for maximum earnings. We believe that there's 5 or 6 individuals who may be interested in pursuing this. It could be as few as 3. But if all 6 individuals were interested, were to follow through on it, compared to our current budget, it would reduce our cost by $280,000 almost.
And I just want to comment, Bob, it could be as few as 0. They have other
Sure.
processing now, but it goes back to, that's the savings would then come from layoffs versus the savings in the retirement.
Correct. What this does, if this happens and all 6 go, it creates an opportunity to fill that gap in the 605,000 between the additional revenue and this, and the use of the liability reserve. It reduces our budget gap from 600,000 down to about 140,000. So obviously this would depend on who would actually participate or not. But that has the opportunity to close that gap. At $140,000, if we were to develop the 2021 budget using that, and then implement the first 5 budget reductions seen here, actually 4 budget reductions listed here, that would cover our gap.
That's at a flat aid, correct, Bob?
That's at a flat aid. And I think that should be the budget that we present to the community. And then the budget reductions based off of aid reductions, because that creates a spending ceiling for the district. And then aid reductions would be offset with spending reductions to work underneath that ceiling.
I'm going to go through that asterisk, Bob, on the eliminate special ed teacher.
Sure. The eliminate special ed teacher is a $44,000 position. It's a position that was hired this year to fill the specific needs of a specific individual student. That student is no longer enrolled in the district. The teacher is otherwise actively employed, providing supports to other classroom teachers. And our principals could speak to that if need be. But that is not factored into the cumulative savings because that position is one of the positions that would be salvaged with the retirement plan. So we have two of the 6 teachers that we talked about who are senior that are interested, are considering this option, are special education teachers. They would retire. They would be rehired by the district as long-term subs at a fixed salary, which is significantly below what they're earning now, and that's where the savings are generated. But because they would be less senior than this new teacher, we would not be allowed to lay off the new teacher. Otherwise, we would have to forego bringing the retiree back, which would then they would, if they didn't have the guarantee of the position, they would not take advantage of the early retirement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're going to see in the updated report that was handed out today, that position and a few other positions where it's grayed out under the cumulative savings, you would see what the savings would be. This is gross savings if we had to implement layoffs and where those positions fall on the administrative team's priority, but they are not included in the cumulative savings as you go down the list. So if this concept, if this proposal falls apart, either at the individual level or in finalizing discussions for an agreement with the association or is rejected by the board, then we would request that those positions, that we do look at laying off those positions. But honestly, there's $279,000 of savings. If we were to do the layoffs, it comes to about 300, what'd I say, Greg, about $310,000, $320,000 of savings. So there's a $37,000 additional savings by doing layoffs. However, that savings would be offset by potential unemployment cost, which would be as much as $78,000. So it ends up costing us more. In addition, programmatically and instructionally and teaching wise, we would have 6 more FTE of staff if we go with a retirement plan than with layoffs. So I believe that administration would be advocating for implementing this retiree rehire plan once the details are finalized.
When do you think you would have a definitive answer on the overall concept, Greg?
I think they're supportive of the concept, but getting a commitment from those teachers before the budget vote is unlikely. It's I think that we probably won't know by the time for them to be able to get all their questions answered.
Okay.
I think what we would need to do is build a budget based on reductions, and if people retire, we're able to bring them back. But I did explain to the teachers that I met with yesterday that at the most likely scenario is I would need to know by June 15th if they were going to. So we would want to be able to recall anybody that we gave a layoff notice to prior to July 1st. So June 15th was the date that I floated out for their consideration.
And using that scenario, incorporating layoffs rather than counting on the retirement program, in order to cover the $605,000 deficit, we would need to go as far down the list as the itinerant counseling position to get us between the additional revenue and this reduction and the use of the liability reserve to get us to cover the $605,000.
In that group, Greg, is the special patrol officers, or at least one of them. Has the county indicated if they're going to be supportive of this program going forward, because they're going to be in a bind too?
I reached out to the town supervisor today. Cliff said that the town is not going to be able to continue to support the $10,000 portion.
Right.
And he said that the county has not made a decision yet, but he shared with me a couple of weeks ago that it was that they were looking at everything too. They've got a tight budget as well, and they were looking at the SPOs as well. But there's been no definitive on that. In fact, that probably should be. I know that we talked about that, Bob, with the special patrol officer. Did you factor in the cost of the special patrol officer is probably going to be more like $38,000 if the county doesn't contribute? So that's not factored in there, right?
That is not factored in. That's just our current cost right now, which is 50% of the cost. So.
Right, and I see in the revised, you've taken out the contribution that we got from the town and the village, correct?
Yes. So
this,
I guess
this list is, excuse me, just one moment. This list is in order of the administrative ranking currently. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, we started with the initial ranking that we did with the scores of 1, 2, and 3, and then broke down the scores of 2 into sub scores. We took all the scores off, and in today's meeting, we basically looked at it more holistically and said we should put this above that, and so it's been shuffled a little bit, but it's been fairly consistent since this first started showing up.
Okay.
So if we have a $605,000 gap and we just closed 160,000 of it with the use of reserves and the capital exclusion, the tax gap formula, that leaves about 445,000. And I guess at this point it would be good for us to know whether or not any of these are holy grails that we do not want to touch, which is the implement or keep as is columns, and then if we do, which ones are the first ones cut, which is the second round, just to make sure that when we get the state aid, what I'd like to do is, if we know we have to come down to here, and then we can to balance the current budget, and then we need to add another 750,000 to it. I'd like it'll make it much easier before next week to come down and say, okay, I need to hit 1.15. That'll get us to there. This is, what it looks like. So we're not jumping all over the place. I'd like to have them in a sliding, basically a sliding scale.
Can you expound on the itinerant counseling, Greg, or someone at the elementary?
Brian, do you want to talk about what the counseling services are we have through BOCES?
Sure. We have a 2-day-a-week counselor from BOCES and then one social worker 3 days a week. So the .4 counselor, when we weighed the options, we would rather maintain the social worker to support the students 3 days a week and work with 3 days versus the 2 days.
The counseling is as much social as academic, am I correct?
Well, it's somewhat IEP driven, and then they also do some non-IEP social skills groups to work with students who are having some concerns.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Murray, we have Danielle Bennett, the behavioral specialist as well. She's with us Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays.
Okay.
You're going to eliminate lunch and recess, aid time. How is that going to be supervised?
So previously, the teachers would monitor lunch and recess. This year, when I joined, I created this schedule where they would not have a lunch duty. So we would return to that previous schedule.
When did they start having a lunch duty?
2 years ago, they had one. They had lunch duty for 1 quarter,
Okay,
which is what the contract allows.
So that person that's on lunch duty with that grade would then follow them out to recess, or would there be a change to allow them to eat and have one of the other teachers?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, obviously we have to work through it, but
Right. Yeah, I would meet with the team leaders and we would work through it if that's necessary.
okay.
Yeah.
Do we want to go through the list one by one? And to make the decision about something on the chopping block, or it should be kept? I mean, I think some of these will be easy to implement, like utilities as a result of the EPC will allow us to lower our utilities budget. It's nice to have the utilities budget larger to reflect the uncertainty of utility costs, but we have been under budget and our budget has grown the last 2 years. So there is some latitude there. Matt has reviewed the maintenance service contracts and he and I have talked about it. We've identified those in the detailed handout. So there's some room there. We just added a classroom furniture budget this year of $25,000, and then there's other equipment that we could pare back on for a year. The psych services private contract is a contract we initiated this year to provide additional support related to one particular student, and Brian confirms that that's not going to be, we probably won't need that next year. Are we safe with moving forward on those to incorporate into the budget for next year?
I have no objection to that statement.
I'm comfortable with that. I mean, I'll take a look through this revised. We got this sort of because of your input from the meetings today. We didn't get this until meeting time.
Yep.
So I don't know how comfortable I would be going through and ranking until we get to 450,000. But I guess my gut reaction is for the amount of time that the administration has put into it. Unless I see something that concerns me greatly, I would defer to the folks who are going to have to run the buildings next year. That's my personal opinion.
When you go way to the very bottom, where you're talking eliminating kindergarten, pre-K, ed, the asterisks refer to what?
Those refer back to, those are, actually, I should have put those positions in gray on the cumulative savings as well, because if we do implement the retiree program, we would not be able to lay those teachers off.
Well, I
Because
I couldn't support myself. I could not support eliminating either pre-K or kindergarten. And ag ed, we worked too hard to get here. I would really hate to see that go away.
What you'll notice at the bottom of that table, Murray, is that's where the desperation comes.
I know. I'm also looking at your other, where you're rating ones on the other one. So yeah, I get it.
That got to the point where we were like, what else is even an option?
Yeah.
But there's some. I saw somebody posted in the community somewhere that we don't need 2 principals, for example. Well, the fact of the matter is we do. Every building has to have a principal by law.
Well, that's back to what I always say. People don't know what they don't know until they're part of the culture.
We were just trying. We got to the point where, all right, if we had to come up with $3 million, we can't come up with $3 million, and without hitting like core classes that we have to offer.
Right.
That's it. Really does become becomes a challenge.
Even at the top of that page, when you're talking about, you're cutting sciences and math and English, that's scary, And this, Bob, just refresh me. This list is all based on a 0% increase in state aid.
This list right now is,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
This list is just, we went through the process of identifying expenditures that could be reduced to a varying degree of hardship, independent of what would happen with state aid. And the intent here is to identify, one, we have to fill the $600,000 gap in the budget for next year without any aid cuts. And then 2, if we get aid cuts, how bad is it going to be, and how we basically create a sliding scale of how far down that list do we go. And so that's what I'm hoping to get a sense of. So that way, when we get a list on Friday, that if we get told on Friday that we are facing a 10% aid reduction, that we start to implement, be able to respond to that and implement, look for an additional almost $1.2 million. And the only way to get to $1.2 million is going to be some significantly difficult cuts.
To get to 1.2, you're about through the list.
Correct. Now, this list does not, this cumulative savings list does not address the revenues that we've talked about.
Correct.
But it also you know, keep in mind, the first 450,000 or so is going to be used to balance the current budget without any aid reductions. So to get to all the way down.
Right. I mean, I'm not keen on any of it, but like Nikki said, I mean, I know that you administrators have put a lot of time and effort in it, and you're the ones that have to live day to day with it.
And that's right. I mean, we all have to live with it, and it's all devastating.
It is.
When you get really the first 150,000, it really starts to, 170,000. Right in that, you really start to feel it after that. So can we live with it? We have to if that's what we're facing. But it's going to be painful and it's going to be devastating. And we hope that there's a way that the state's able to pull through, and the federal government is able to pull through. But we don't have any indication that that's that we can expect anything. Because it's going to come close to addressing a 20% reduction in aid. So it's
well, it's devastating statewide, because do you know what percentage of the districts are high needs, as are we statewide? Probably 50–60%. Am I correct, or?
I'm not sure.
I'm not either.
But the best guesses are if the state is going to reduce aid by 20%, it's not going to be 20% by every district. Is what the best guess is. Conversation with NISCUS today was they'll take the wealthiest district and reduce their aid by 40%. And take the poorest districts and reduce their aid by 5 or 10%. And the poorer you are, the less you're probably going to have to experience that 20% reduction. But we are in a dark tunnel right now, trying to figure out what number is that. Even when the governor comes out this week and gives us the new number, he has how many more times can he take aid back, Bob, over the course of the year?
There's 3 additional look-back periods, May and June, July through December, and then January through March. So even if we start to recover the second half of the spring and the summer, and if we have a rebound impact in the winter, and revenues, early next year come in way bad, we might be looking at, mid-year, late year reductions really at that point.
All right, and I know that we had some conversation about this earlier, Bob, but when you look at the revenues and you see the 418 run, we were counting on a $250,000 surplus that we could have applied to next year's budget. But now we're expecting with the furlough and the shutting down of the heat and trying to be as efficient as we've been, we're looking at a $325,000 use of surplus, or does that still not include some of those things?
No, the 325,000 was the estimate last month. I'm still working on estimating what we're looking at for the end of 1920. The furlough savings is about $60,000 for the 6 weeks. You're going to be asked next week to extend that by 2 weeks to June 14th, which would add another $20,000 of savings. Our electricity bill and natural gas bill, we just received the final invoice from NYSEG on that. We came in $20,000 under So we just freed up under what the appropriation amount was, or I'm sorry, the encumbered amount. So we just freed up more dollars there. So we're, the 325 is, I believe it's conservative.
All right, thanks.
So without knowing if we have retirees that are going to opt into this retirement plan, and if whether or not the plan itself is going to be accepted, should we plan on using the 325,000 or whatever the projected amount is to help balance next year's budget?
Well, I say absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
How would we only be thinking of extending the furlough plan to, the end of, or June 15th or 14th at this point? Why wouldn't you go right to the end of the school year?
To be quite frank, if we did that, then every person who is not a 12-month employee would be eligible to collect unemployment over the course of the summer, and that would wipe out the savings that we just generated.
Okay.
Bob, one of the things that we've talked about is we were expecting the end of the school year to be June 26th. There's still a lot of unclarity with whether that's going to be the case or not. I'm thinking that we're going to end up being able to potentially close, have our last day be June 19th. So bringing people back on June 15th is enough time to get them back on the books and back off unemployment, correct?
Yes, I believe so. As long as we were providing them with
Reasonable assurance.
yeah, reasonable assurance that they would be returning in the fall. So if we use the 325 figure and these cuts that have the red X there, as well as $130,000 capital exclusion, we actually balanced the 2021 budget, which means that everything else is available to respond to any potential aid cuts. I don't know if there are more things, especially at the top of the list, that people would be open to implementing before those aid cuts, thus reducing the amount of fund balance that we would use, or not.
Where do you intend to reduce the special patrol officer, Greg?
We would reduce the elementary SPO, but have the high school SPO. We try to figure out if we can get some kind of presence in both buildings.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we've always said that at the elementary school, we're in a better position with campus and state police and the sheriffs there to respond quickly anyway, so.
Now, the one area that we spent a little bit of time talking about was that capital outlay. Rob, you haven't talked about that, right?
I have not talked about the outlay project.
The capital outlay, along the same lines, is like a bus proposition. The danger that you run into, and just to make the community aware that $100,000 capital outlay project has a net cost to the district of $11,500. You get $100,000 worth of work for that small amount of money, and if we didn't have it, there's work that we end up that we'll end up having to do ourselves probably that doesn't get that same kind of reimbursement. So we're able to save, and if we eliminate the capital outlay project, for example, from the budget, we save $100,000 in expense. We're going to be pulling the aid out of, or we're going to be generating the aid from this year's project. But a year from now, it really has a net impact on the budget of $11,000. It's costing us $90,000 to save.
Is there any consensus on building aid going forward? Have you heard anything? This, how sacred is building aid going to be?
It's been an item of discussion, I know, from the governor, but there's been no changes as of this point. Same thing with BOCES aid.
Okay.
Aid, building aid, transportation aid, all those expense-driven aids.
So far are safe.
So far, I think it's going to be harder to get a project approved, right, Bob?
Yes, I would think so. The expense-driven aids piece was, the governor's been advocating for changes with that for some time, but the legislature has stood very firmly against that. And the leadership in the legislature has been outspoken about not wanting to change the formularies for expense-driven aids, nor to incorporate them into the foundation aid calculation. So unless there's a significant change in one or both houses of the legislature, I'm not sure that, I think that those amounts are pretty firm.
Okay.
Those aids are fairly, relatively, politically speaking, safe.
Another area we talked about was arts and education and exploratory enrichment. Did that come out, Bob?
That did come out. We actually, because we talked about a way to use those two coasters, which are BOCES aidable at 72.9%, in the subsequent year, and to use fund balance to kind of help drive those programs. Now, it's not reflected in the revenue side of it yet. I'm still working out, trying to figure that out. But we basically use fund balance to help pay for the first year. For example, the trip to Europe, running that through one of the coasters, and then having the aid come back, and that aid be dedicated back into fund balance once it's received.
And then reimburse the families the aided share from that, because the BOCES aid is going to be uncertain until next year's budget's adopted.
Correct.
So we can identify that we can do that for the families, and then when we get that reimbursement, we can, they'd have to front the money and get the reimbursement after we get the aid commitment.
Yeah, I'm still checking on the feasibility of using that aid as a reimbursement to the parents.
Going forward, Greg, virtual education, is that something that's going to be more, I don't know what adjective I want to use, but
More accessible, and
more part of our curriculum statewide?
I think so. In fact, Eddie, why don't you talk a little bit about what your teacher's excitement is with regard to using some of those virtual platforms, and then I'm going to follow up with a conversation I've been having with BOCES.
No, so we're utilizing Seesaw, which is an online platform, which I discussed at a previous meeting, and Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams is just used as similar to a morning meeting, checking in with their students. Yesterday I was in some second grade meetings, visiting with the students, and it's a nice time for the teachers to interact with the students and the students to interact with one another. Seesaw allows teachers to present material in an interactive way and actually incorporate links from other resources, databases that we subscribe to, such as Raz Kids, things of that nature. And the students can upload videos. For instance, a teacher can conduct a fluency check by a student recording him or herself reading a passage and then uploading it to Seesaw. The teachers can provide immediate feedback. They can record videos and communicate with each student. And each student has a private journal. So I can go into Seesaw and see every student's journal and the work they've completed. Teachers give feedback. I have to say, I am impressed with what we've developed at the elementary school. When I look at my own children and what they're doing in other districts, we are just superior compared to other districts regarding what we're doing at the elementary school. And that's a testament to our teachers, their dedication, their willingness to collaborate, and it shows. If I could show you some of the products, you would be extremely impressed what we're doing at the elementary school. I'm very proud to be a part of it. And so we're having success, and we're getting great feedback from the parents regarding it as well.
I guess what I wanted you to identify too, Eddie, is teachers' excitement to utilize those platforms even when they come back.
Yes, my own excitement for what we've accomplished. But yes, the teachers have been asking when I started in September in the fall regarding the use of specific platforms or programs, virtual programs. Some districts are using Class Dojo and other Google Classroom, and the Seesaw. What I've seen from veteran teachers conducting professional development, going on Seesaw Facebook pages, collaborating with teachers across the country to get ideas, and the idea of incorporating some of that into our instruction when we return to school, to have that diversity regarding our instructional strategies and methods. Stephanie Hughes, I'm extremely proud of. She is now a Seesaw ambassador. She has completed all the training, so she's been collaborating with our teachers at the elementary school as well. But there is excitement, there is momentum regarding the inclusion of some of this virtual learning into our classroom.
Okay, now the $1,000 question, Greg or Bob. How does that affect a district financially? Are there savings to be gleaned from virtual education or expenses?
So there's a couple of things to look at with regard to, for example, course recovery. BOCES is modifying their alternative education model to create a virtual alt-ed instruction. The concept would be, we've never, at least for the last 4 years, we haven't sent any students to the alt-ed program, partly because I had a hard time justifying a $35,000 expense for that model. We have always found other ways to provide services to those kids. What they're looking at doing now is providing a virtual environment. A lot of those kids are in alt-ed, not all of them, but a good number of them are in alt-ed because of behavior issues. So you go into a virtual environment, and if they're behaviorally using swear words, you can just mute them. You can provide the material and the content and press the mute button, deliver what needs to be delivered. Along the same lines of alt-ed is you can have a student who's another alt-ed student who failed English 9, and now they're in 10th grade and they can't fit English 9 and all their other courses and their services and things into their regular schedule. So those kids could be assigned in an alt-ed virtual environment for English 9, but still be in traditional school for everything else. So there's opportunities to help kids recover coursework. I also see possible opportunities for students that are on medical homebound, whether we use OC's alt-ed, or if we have our own teachers using Microsoft Teams during the classroom and have the kid. These are all things that we would have to have some conversations with MIFA and get a good working understanding of what needs to happen. But I think that people are very comfortable with the platforms, and it's going to open up opportunities for expansion and conversations for further use as we return to what the new normal is going to be.
Again, do you see financial savings or costs associated with an expansion of virtual learning?
I don't, the answer is yes, but I think they're buried, they're hidden. How much costs? You're talking about, the cost of tutors. I don't know how much we spend on tutors during suspension, for example, Bob, but we're talking about, less than $10,000, I would imagine. Costs, maybe opportunity costs, Murray, or maybe it's opportunities with limited cost, or if we had to assign students to 3 or 4 students to a section of ELA for a makeup course or AIS classes, it would the cost of putting a student in a virtual environment, I think it was $900 a course. So we could, and you get 72% aid on that.
Right.
I see some opportunities, and the costs would be less, but I think the vision is still a little blurry. What it would all look like.
There are. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say that there are some costs that we know will incur, such as the Seesaw program cost. I mean, we're running that through the RIC, so it is aidable. So using those platforms, there's a fiscal cost to those platforms. The opportunities are that we have students that we can keep enrolled on our books and hopefully graduate without having to send them off to, for example, the BOCES Alt-Ed program. So I don't think we've done there hasn't been a detailed analysis on our end on it in terms of how it would impact us moving forward. There will be some additional costs. There could be some savings as well.
Do you administrators think that a lot of the push for virtual is more about, for lack of a better term, social distancing than it is about educational opportunities?
I really believe some of those platforms we could incorporate into the classroom. I think right now what we have, the social distance, the students, especially at the elementary, and even at the middle high school, they need that interaction with their teachers. They need the interaction, that physical interaction within the buildings. But I feel it's an opportunity for us when it comes to our instructional methods and how we present material to students, that this can be that direct and indirect instruction and that coordination between the two in the classroom to diversify that. So I do feel it's useful. I feel going all virtual is actually you also have to consider the social emotional aspect involved as well.
Right. Yeah. And I'm going to be pretty upset if we don't get to use the Pablo Picasso Learning Center.
Hey, I hear it's ready. I can't wait.
Yeah.
No, I do think it's going to be a combination.
Okay.
And the cost, Murray, there are some costs that Bob had alluded to, like we bought 60 hotspots, for example.
Right. Yep.
Those are not cheap. I want to say they're going to run us about $12,000 a year. We did get BOCES 8 on those as well, but the coaster to opt in to be able to use BOCES virtual learning environment, it's a $7,000 a year base price. So there's an expense plus $900 per course per semester for students. But we were talking about this yesterday or the day before about using that model for our summer school program this year, rather than, for both. So what you just identified, social distancing, we don't know if we're going to be able to have kids back in. But even if we can we be more efficient with our summer school by using a BOCES virtual model?
Okay. Well, I think you've answered my questions. That's what we pay you people for.
Anything else on that spreadsheet, on that table that jumps out, other than none of it's good?
Yeah, that I would second that.
Have we heard anything from the college about what they plan on doing next year for their own students and how that might affect students, our students who enroll? So I know like the discussions at Colgate, every faculty member has to have planned out 3 different scenarios for how they're going to teach their class. It may be, students coming and going, and I just didn't know if we had any conversation with the college. So they don't really like that, but has the college reached out to anybody?
That I know of.
Because typically you'd have a college or university communicating with the students that they anticipate enrolling in fall, things that might be happening. And we really don't have any way for anyone to be communicating with our students who might be enrolling in the fall.
I mean, from Oswego's perspective, which I think wouldn't be any different than Morrisville, they're still seem to be going back, going. Delaney's continuing down her path of filling out stuff to be on campus and choosing more rooms and roommates and all that. It seems like that's the path that they're at least planning for. Obviously, if they don't need any of that, then they can fall back and they don't need any of it. But if they don't plan to have it, and they do.
I mean, because their side of our agreement is bus repair. If they get where they're not using buses, are they going to be interested in continuing with that, Greg? Have you had a discussion with Dr. Rogers or whomever?
Yeah, they'll still be interested in having their, unless their students don't come back at all in the fall, they're still going to need to have those.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
They're going to have their vehicles maintained. This gets harder to justify the maintenance if our kids aren't going to the college for the courses.
I agree with that.
We'll operate with the understanding that our kids are eventually going to get on those buses.
Okay, fair enough.
But that's another one. It's another one that's really hard, like everything else. We have a $57,000 expense with a $43,000 return. We get so many opportunities for kids for $14,000.
Right.
You get to that point of just desperation where you're looking for every nickel you can find to provide our core responsibilities at that point. Any other points from you, Bob?
No. if we're good with where things are at, we'll prepare finalizing the 1920 budget based on the feedback from tonight's meeting. We'll keep this list moving forward to share with you after we hear what comes out of Albany on Friday in terms of potential impact. Do not be surprised if we have late documents on Monday or even Tuesday reflecting that information. But I think in terms of building a budget to present to the community, I think we've got something with, the $17.9 million budget or $17.8 million budget that if people are comfortable with, we can have that prepared to be approved. And then any reductions would be from that rather than slashing the budget for the community to approve. And then if the aid reductions are not as bad, not being able to put them back in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, do you want to see if we can get consensus, Bob, on the tax levy increase to build around?
Yeah, I do. Are people feeling the 4.935 or the 5.45? I know a couple people, 3 people have been, were vocal earlier about which number they supported. And I guess I'm asking the rest.
Does anybody, considering that we only have one chance to put this out to vote, and if it goes down, it's to contingency, should we focus on what the first number is? So keep it below 5, just because we saw that that's what people are going to focus on. If the difference in half a percentage point was $200,000, it might be more. It might be worth, in my opinion, fighting for that extra 0.5%. But when it's going to be less than $30,000,
$24,000,
less than $25,000, it feels like
it's a big risk.
What was that, Murray?
I think the risk is not worth the reward. I'm agreeing with your assessment.
Steve?
I'm in favor of staying at the 4.9.
Right.
I'm fine. I can go either way, but I don't disagree with what you're saying in this day.
It would be an entirely different scenario if you had a second shot at this, but because you don't, and the contingency is crippling, I think this year we're better served at the lower number.
Correct. I would agree. If we had a second shot at it, then I would say
if we had a second shot at it, I would try for the 5.4, but because we don't, which I didn't know till today, I would be inclined to support the 4.9.
Okay, I think we have consensus there, and the discussion earlier was the consensus that we continue to build the budget under the layoff scenario rather than the expectation of retirements.
I want to just go back just for a second, and
Okay.
what we just talked about, and I think that we have consensus on that 4.935. But that's also with the understanding, and when you sent me that email today, responding to the question that I posed to you from Questar, it's the first I heard of that we weren't going to be able to get put a second budget out to voters. It's been confirmed now from other sources as far as being silent in the executive order. But there, you know, for all we know, there could be some clarity brought between now and the time of the vote. Well, I guess we have to adopt the budget on Tuesday. But if there's additional clarity that's provided, I think maybe what we do is we just get back together for a quick conversation to talk about any kind of new revelations regarding possible second votes. But even doing a second vote, the logistics of that would be
Right.
Well, the
And
cost-
what are you truly adding back at $24,000 too?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to cost, we'll end up spending almost half of that just in postage and envelopes.
There you go.
So I just want to make sure that I'm clear with you that it's that the executive order is silent on it. They didn't say there is no vote, but that's the understanding of the experts in the field, is that there will be no second vote.
Silence speaks volumes.
Okay.
Okay, does anybody have anything else or any questions at this point?
No.
Okay, there's no need for an executive session at this time. Does anybody? Okay, very good. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you. Have a good night.
We'll see you next week.
Have a nice night.
Good night.
Any comments, feedback, et cetera, feel free to let Greg or I know.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Greg, reminder, those 2 documents that need signatures.
Yes, I wrote myself a note.
Thank you, Bob.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Touchscreen, it doesn't work.
It's a touch screen that's locked.